Welcome to Cheat Masters. Join us for relatable cheating stories that will make you laugh, cry, and nod your head in recognition that I never thought it would happen to me. Not in a million years. I used to think cheating was something that happened to other people. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. I never saw it coming, and by the time I did, it was too late. My wife, Claire, and I had been together for 8 years. We met in college, both ambitious and full of dreams. We had the perfect life. A nice house, a steady income, and a circle of friends who constantly told us how perfect we were together. To be honest, I started taking it for granted. I thought Claire would never betray me. We had our disagreements, but what couple doesn't? Things started to change about 6 months ago. At first, I didn't notice anything too unusual. But there were subtle signs, small things that, in hindsight, were warning bells that I failed to hear. She started staying late at work, saying it was for a big project. Then, there were the unexplained weekends away with friends she never mentioned. I remember one weekend in particular when she said she was going to a work retreat, but her behavior when she returned was off. She was distant, cold, and often lost in thought. At the time, I just chalked it up to stress. After all, we were both busy with our careers. I didn't question it until the day I stumbled upon something I never should have seen. It happened on a random Wednesday evening. I was cleaning out the garage when I found a forgotten envelope stuffed behind an old box. It wasn't addressed to me, but the handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was Claire's. My heart sank as I opened it. Inside was a letter, an email printout really, from an unfamiliar name, Chris. The tone was casual, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a flirtation. It was a confession. Claire had been seeing someone. They had been meeting in secret for months, sneaking around behind my back. The worst part, they were planning to go away together. She was planning to leave me for him. I could hardly breathe. The room spun as I read and reread the words. I had no idea who Chris was, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Claire, the woman I loved, had been lying to me for months. She had been carefully orchestrating her exit while I remained oblivious, living in the illusion of a perfect marriage. I confronted her that night, my hands trembling as I handed her the letter. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sat there, looking strangely calm, almost relieved. She admitted it all. How the affair had started, how it had progressed, and how she had already made up her mind to leave. The most chilling part was when she said, "I've been planning my exit for a while now. I thought it would be easier this way. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't keep living a lie." I was stunned. There was no fight, no anger, just a cold, calculated admission of betrayal. She had known all along, every step of the way, exactly how and when she was going to leave me. Over the next few days, Claire moved out. There was no drama, no pleading, no "let's fix this." She had made her decision long, before I had any clue what was going on. I was left with the bitter taste of betrayal and the uncomfortable realization that I had been living in a marriage where I was the only one invested. The hardest part wasn't just the affair. It was a realization that the person I thought I knew so well had been deceiving me, calculating every move, every word, to ensure that when she left, it would be clean, painless, and without guilt. It made me question everything. The life we built, the conversations we had, the love we shared. In the end, the exit wasn't a dramatic one. It wasn't a heated argument or a tear-filled confrontation. It was simply a carefully planned exit from a marriage she no longer wanted. As I watched her walk out the door, I couldn't help but wonder how long she had been planning it. How many of the moments I thought were real had been part of her calculated strategy. I'm still trying to put the pieces together. But one thing is clear. Claire's exit wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the trust one had in everyone, and maybe in myself too.
After Claire left, I found myself stuck in a numb haze. The house felt too big, too empty without her. I walked around the rooms, remembering the little details, her favorite mug in the kitchen, the scent of her perfume that lingered on the pillows, the way she'd laugh during our quiet nights in. All of it felt like a cruel joke now. Everything had been a facade, and I was the last one to realize it. For weeks, I couldn't focus on anything. Work became a blur. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but every time I interacted with a colleague or a friend, the weight of Claire's betrayal hung over me like a shadow. The worst part? The people around me didn't seem to understand the gravity of what had happened. They would offer their well-meaning condolences, but none of them could grasp the depth of the devastation I felt. They didn't understand how it felt to have your life suddenly upended, to discover that your partner, the person you trusted more than anyone, had been playing a different game while you were left in the dark. Then came the moment I truly realized how deep her deception had gone. One night, a few weeks after Claire's departure, I went through our old files, trying to sort through the mess of papers and memories that had accumulated over the years. That's when I found it, a journal. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, one I had never seen before. At first, I didn't want to open it, but my curiosity got the best of me. I flipped through the pages, each one filled with her handwriting. The words felt like a punch to my gut. Claire had been writing about everything: the affair, her dissatisfaction with our marriage, and her growing feelings for Chris. She had meticulously documented her every step, as if this had been a project she had been working on for years. She even wrote about the plans she had made to gradually distance herself from me, to emotionally detach before physically leaving. I couldn't understand how someone who had once seemed so loving and dedicated could turn so cold, so calculating. It was as if she had been slowly preparing me for the day she would walk away, leaving me with nothing but empty words and shattered trust. But there was something else in those pages. Something that struck me harder than any of the betrayals. She had never truly loved me. Not in the way I thought she did. She had seen me as an obstacle in her pursuit of something else, something better, something that would give her the life she wanted. Chris had been the answer to that dream, the escape hatch she had been searching for all along. I should have been angry, but all I felt was numbness. The rage I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt like I was reading about someone else's life, a life I no longer had any part in. And yet, there was something about those pages that haunted me. She had thought about it. She had planned it. And when the time came, she didn't hesitate. It was the final confirmation that I was nothing more than a stepping stone in her life. I reached out to some of our mutual friends to try and understand more about what had really been going on. There were whispers. Some people had noticed her odd behavior, but no one had been brave enough to say anything to me directly. One of our closest friends, Sarah, eventually confessed that she had suspected something was wrong for months. She had overheard Claire talking about Chris a few times, never mentioning him by name, but it was clear something was happening. Still, Sarah didn't think to tell me. She said she didn't want to interfere, didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. I didn't blame them. In some twisted way, I was glad they hadn't said anything. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it, to face the reality of Claire's betrayal. But now that I knew, there was no going back. The truth had been laid bare, and it left me with an emptiness I couldn't fill. Eventually, I decided to move on. It wasn't easy, and I wasn't sure how to start, but the pain of the past few months began to soften. I packed away the memories, the photos, the gifts, the reminders of a life that no longer existed. I left the house, moved into a smaller place, and started to rebuild. The process was slow, and there were days when I felt like I would never get past it. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when I realized that I was more than the man she had left behind. Claire's exit, while brutal, was ultimately the catalyst for change. It forced me to confront the parts of myself I had neglected, the parts one had put on hold while I was busy trying to please someone else. I started to find my own voice again, to pursue the things that mattered to me, and to seek out the relationships that were based on trust and mutual respect. I never spoke to Claire again. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved in with Chris, and they were planning to get married. Part of me felt a strange sense of relief. Whatever was between us was over. She had her new life, and I had mine. In the end, Claire's calculated exit gave me one thing: freedom. It wasn't the freedom I had expected, not the dramatic, cathartic release I had dreamed of when I first found out about her affair. It was quieter, slower, but it was mine. And I would rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. As the months passed, I found myself navigating a life I never thought I'd have to face. People often tell you that time heals all wounds, but for me, time was more like a companion that silently walked beside me, reminding me of everything that had happened while giving me the space to breathe again. I started focusing more on myself. I signed up for therapy, not because I was broken, but because I needed someone to help me make sense of the mess that had been my life with Claire. The sessions were uncomfortable at first. I didn't want to admit how deeply I had been hurt, how lost I felt. But over time, I began to peel back the layers of pain and betrayal. It wasn't just about Claire, it was about me, too. How had I allowed myself to ignore the signs? How had I become so wrapped up in the image of a perfect marriage that I failed to see what was right in front of me? Therapy gave me a new perspective. It helped me realize that, in many ways, I had been living in a relationship where I was constantly trying to please Claire. I had overlooked my own needs, my own desires, and had centered my world around making sure she was happy. In the end, it was this imbalance that had created the cracks in our marriage. I couldn't blame Claire for everything. While her actions were unforgivable, I had allowed her to shape my world in ways I wasn't proud of. Gradually, I began reconnecting with old friends I had drifted away from. People who had always been there for me, but whom I had neglected in favor of my relationship. It was a humbling process, but it felt good to rebuild those connections. It felt good to remember that my life was bigger than one person, that there were people who cared about me for who I was, not just the person I had been in relation to Claire. One evening, a few months after Claire left, I bumped into Sarah at a coffee shop. She was sitting alone, her laptop open in front of her, but when she saw me, she smiled and waved me over. She was the first friend I had seen since everything happened who hadn't avoided me. We exchanged pleasantries, and she asked how I was doing. For the first time in a long time, I found myself telling the truth, even though it wasn't easy. "I'm better, Sarah," I said, surprising myself with the words. "I'm still angry, still hurt, but I'm better." She nodded knowingly, and we talked for a while, reminiscing about old times, laughing about silly things we'd done in the past. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had in months. It felt like stepping out of a fog, like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a small, dark room. Sarah apologized again for not saying anything sooner about Claire's affair, but I reassured her that I didn't hold it against her. She didn't know what I needed, and I hadn't asked for help. The truth was, I had been too proud, too wrapped up in my own denial to see the truth when it was staring me in the face. After that conversation, things started to click into place. I started making real, tangible changes. I took up new hobbies, started exercising again, and spent time on personal projects I had always put off. It wasn't just about moving on from Claire, it was about rediscovering who I was outside of her shadow. But there were days when it still stung. Days when I would catch myself wondering what life would have been like if things had been different. If Claire had been honest with me. If I had seen the signs earlier. But those thoughts were fleeting. They didn't define me anymore. A year passed since Claire's departure, and I found myself in a much different place. I had started dating again, cautiously, but it was a reminder that I could open my heart to someone new when the time was right. No one could ever replace Claire, but I wasn't looking for that. I was learning that love didn't have to come with manipulation and deceit. It could be simple, honest, and real. Then, out of the blue, I received a message from Claire. It was short, just a few sentences, but it was enough to shake me. She said she wanted to talk, that she had made a mistake, and that she was sorry for the way things ended between us. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, uncertain of what to do. Part of me wanted to hear her out. I wanted to ask her about everything, about why she had betrayed me, about the reasons behind her cold exit. But then another part of me remembered how I had rebuilt my life, how much stronger I had become without her. The thought of reopening old wounds felt exhausting, even if I was curious about her reasons. In the end, I chose not to respond. I realized that Claire's apology wasn't for me. It was for her. She was seeking closure for herself, trying to undo the damage she had caused. But I had already found my closure. I had healed, and I had moved on. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment. It wasn't a cathartic confrontation where I demanded answers. It was just a quiet decision, one that confirmed how far I had come. I had let go of the version of myself that had been tied to Claire. The man I was now was someone who knew his worth, who understood that he deserved honesty and respect. The calculated exit Claire had planned so meticulously had been her final act in our marriage. But it wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was finally free.